She scratched a stranger's car and left an apology note when she could have just driven away. Just a small honest mistake, nothing more. What she didn't know, the car belonged to the most powerful mafia boss in the city. And that little note just put her name on everyone's radar. Emma Calloway had exactly $11 in her wallet, a half-eaten granola bar in her bag, and a parking ticket she was already 3 days late paying. So when she heard the sound, that soft, sickening scrape of metal kissing metal, she sat completely still behind the wheel and prayed she had imagined it. She hadn't. She stepped out slowly, like maybe moving carefully would somehow undo what had already happened. The Chicago University parking garage was mostly empty at that hour, just flickering overhead lights and the distant hum of the city outside. Her beat-up Honda sat at an awkward angle, halfway out of its space, and right there along the rear door panel of the car she had scraped was a thin silver line that caught the light like a scar. The car she had scraped was not a normal car. Emma had no idea what model it was, but she knew it was the kind of car that belonged in a magazine. Matte black, low to the ground. The kind of vehicle that made people stop walking just to look at it. There was no visible brand logo, just clean aggressive lines and wheels that probably cost more than her entire semester of tuition. She looked around the garage. Nobody was watching. There were no other students, no attendants, no one pulling in or out. A small security camera blinked red near the entrance ramp, but Emma barely noticed it. She could have left. That thought crossed her mind for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened her bag, pulled out a notepad, and started writing. Hi, I'm so sorry. I accidentally scraped your car while pulling out. I know this looks really bad, and I feel terrible. Please contact me, and I will absolutely pay for the damage however long it takes. I'm a student, and I don't have much right now, but I promise I will figure it out. Emma Calloway. She included her phone number. She folded the note carefully and tucked it under the windshield wiper, pressing it down so it wouldn't blow away. Then she got in her car and drove home, already mentally calculating what she could sell. What Emma didn't know, what she had absolutely no way of knowing, was that she had been standing next to that car for less than 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes, the security camera at the entrance ramp had recorded every single second. The exchange was supposed to happen at 9 p.m. 2 men in a silver sedan pulled into the same parking garage 3 hours after Emma had gone. They moved quickly and quietly, the kind of people who had done things like this many times before. The black hypercar was their pickup point, a prearranged location, a prearranged handoff. Tucked inside a magnetic case beneath the rear wheel arch of that car was a drive. Not just any drive. A 128-gigabyte device carrying encrypted financial records spanning 6 years, 3 countries, and enough information to collapse several very powerful careers. When they reached under the car, the case was there. But the drive was gone. The 2 men looked at each other. Then one of them made a phone call. By 11 p.m., the footage from the parking garage camera had already been pulled. Vincent Reed sat at the far end of a long table in a private office on the 42nd floor of a building that officially belonged to a real estate investment firm. He was 34 years old, wore a dark gray suit with no tie, and had the kind of face that people found difficult to read. Calm. Controlled. The sort of calm that comes not from comfort, but from years of deciding that showing nothing is always safer than showing something. His head of security, Marco, set a laptop on the table. One person stopped at the vehicle, Marco said. Female. Student, by the look of her. She was at the car for about 4 minutes. Then she left a note and drove away. Vincent watched the footage. A young woman, small, dark hair pulled back, wearing a university hoodie and carrying a heavy bag. She looked nervous. She looked like someone who had just made a mistake and was genuinely sorry about it. She left a note, Vincent said. Yes, we recovered it. Her name is Emma Calloway. She scratched the car and left her number. A long pause filled the room. And the drive? Vincent asked. Gone. Vincent leaned back slowly. On the screen, Emma was still standing beside the car, head slightly bowed, writing her apology. She looked like the last person in the world capable of stealing a drive worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Which, Vincent had learned a long time ago, was exactly the kind of person you never ignored. Find out everything about her, he said quietly. Marco nodded and closed the laptop. Outside, 42 floors below, Chicago moved through the night completely unaware that a shy girl's apology note had just made her the most talked-about name in the most dangerous circles in the city. Emma was at home eating instant noodles and wondering if she could sell her textbooks. She had no idea her phone was about to change everything. Emma's phone rang at 7:43 in the morning. She was still half asleep, reaching blindly across her nightstand, assuming it was her alarm. When she saw the number, no name, no area code she recognized, just a long string of digits, she let it ring out. Probably a spam call. She got them all the time. She made coffee, showered, and was halfway through her morning routine when it rang again. Same number. She declined it. By the time she reached campus for her 9 a.m. lecture, it had called 3 more times. Emma sat in the back row of her economics class, notebook open, pen in hand, telling herself it was nothing. A robocall. Some insurance scam. She had bigger things to think about. A paper due Thursday, a shift at the campus library that afternoon, and somewhere at the back of her mind, the quiet, persistent worry about how she was going to pay for that scratch. She had looked up the car model the night before. It had taken her a while because she didn't know where to start, but eventually she found it. A Koenigsegg Jesko. Limited production. Base price somewhere around $4 million. She had stared at that number for a long time. Then she had closed the tab and gone to bed because there was nothing else she could do with that information at 11 o'clock at night. Across the city, Vincent's team had already built a complete picture of Emma Calloway by sunrise. 22 years old. Third-year communications student at Chicago University. Scholarship recipient, partial academic, partial financial need. Worked 12 hours a week at the campus library. Rented a studio apartment 6 blocks from campus with 1 roommate. No criminal record. No known associations. Parents in Rockford, Illinois. Father a retired electrician, mother a part-time bookkeeper. No travel history outside the Midwest. Bank account balance that Marco reported with something close to sympathy in his voice. She's exactly what she looks like, Marco said, setting the file on the table. A student who scratched a car and left a note because she felt bad about it. Vincent read through the file carefully. He didn't rush. He never rushed anything. She's clean, he agreed. So she didn't take the drive. Almost certainly not. He closed the folder. Which means someone else was in that garage. Someone we didn't see. Marco pulled up the camera footage again. They had watched it dozens of times already. Emma arriving. Emma scraping the car. Emma writing the note. Emma leaving. Then 3 hours of nothing. Then the 2 men arriving for the exchange. No one else. No one suspicious. No delivery worker. No lingering figures. Nothing that suggested any kind of deliberate operation. Pull footage from the surrounding blocks, Vincent said. Every camera within a 4-block radius. And check the garage again, not just the entrance ramp. Every angle. What Vincent's team didn't know yet was that they weren't the only ones who had found Emma. A man named Curtis Wade sat in a rental car parked half a block from Chicago University's main entrance. He worked for a group that had been watching Vincent Reed's operation for the better part of 2 years, waiting for exactly this kind of crack to appear. When word got out that the drive had gone missing during the exchange, Curtis had moved fast. His people had contacts inside the parking garage management company. Nothing dramatic, just a low-level employee who passed along information for a modest monthly payment. The footage had come to Curtis less than an hour after it reached Vincent. He had watched the same video. He had seen the same girl in the university hoodie. And unlike Vincent, Curtis wasn't particularly interested in whether Emma had actually taken the drive. He was interested in what she might know, what she might have seen, and most importantly, whether she could be useful as leverage. He watched her walk across the university courtyard from behind his sunglasses, a coffee cup in one hand, backpack on one shoulder, completely unbothered, completely ordinary. He made a note of her schedule. Emma noticed them on her way to the library. 2 people. A man sitting on a bench near the campus coffee cart who had been there when she arrived and was still there 40 minutes later, not reading, not on his phone, just sitting. And a woman standing near the corner of the humanities building who moved when Emma moved, then stopped when Emma stopped to check her phone. Emma stood very still for a moment, pretending to scroll through her messages. The woman near the corner looked away a second too late. Emma kept walking. She told herself she was being paranoid. People sat on benches. People stood on corners. This was a university campus with thousands of people moving around it every hour. She was inventing patterns because she was already anxious about the car. But the phone calls kept coming. By lunchtime, she had received 9 calls from 3 different unknown numbers. None of them left voicemails. Each call lasted just long enough to confirm she had an active line, then disconnected. She mentioned it to her roommate, Priya, that evening. Probably someone trying to scare you into paying faster, Priya said practically, not looking up from her laptop. Rich people do that. They get their assistant to harass you until you show up with a check. Emma wanted to believe that. It made sense. She had left her number on the car, after all. Whoever owned it had every right to call her. But something about the calls felt wrong. They didn't feel like someone chasing a repair bill. They felt like someone checking whether she was there. She picked up on the 10th call. Silence on the other end. Not complete silence. She could hear ambient noise, the faint suggestion of a room, someone breathing carefully. Hello, Emma said. Nothing. If this is about the car, I know. I'm sorry. I left a note. I want to pay for it. I just need. The line went dead. Emma sat on her bed and stared at her phone. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts weren't. Something had shifted in the past 24 hours, and she couldn't quite name it yet. But she felt it the way you feel a change in weather, not seeing it, just knowing it's coming. She pulled up the photo she had taken of the scratch before driving away the previous morning. A thin silver line, barely 2 inches long, on a $4 million car. She had felt so guilty about it. She had written that note because it was the right thing to do, because walking away from a mistake wasn't something she was capable of. Now, sitting alone in her small apartment with unknown numbers cycling through her phone, she wondered if doing the right thing had somehow dropped her into the middle of something she didn't understand at all. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't know yet how deep it went. 40 floors above the city, Vincent Reed had just found something new in the parking garage footage. A delivery worker, appearing near the hypercar, briefly, quietly, less than 6 minutes after Emma had driven away. It had taken his team nearly 2 full days to notice him. Emma had already noticed him on her own. She just didn't know it yet. The message came through at 8:15 on Wednesday morning. Not a call this time. A text from yet another number she didn't recognize, but this one was different. No silence. No breathing. Just 12 words typed in clean, unhurried sentences. My name is Vincent Reed. The car in the garage was mine. We should meet. Emma read it 3 times. Then she did what any reasonable person would do. She typed his name into a search engine. The results were not reassuring. There wasn't much. That was the first strange thing. For someone who apparently owned a $4 million car, Vincent Reed had almost no public footprint. A few mentions in business columns, something about a real estate firm, a single photograph from what looked like a charity event 3 years ago. In the photo, he was standing slightly apart from the group, jacket on, expression unreadable, looking like someone who had attended out of obligation rather than interest. Emma stared at that photograph for a long moment. He didn't look like the kind of person who chased students over parking scratches. She typed back carefully. How do I know this is really about the car? The reply came in under a minute. Because I read your note. You offered to pay in installments. Nobody invents that detail. Emma almost smiled despite herself. She typed, where? Riverside Cafe, Michigan Avenue, 1 p.m., public place. Bring whatever you need to feel comfortable. She spent the rest of the morning preparing. Emma was not the kind of person who walked into anything unprepared. She printed 2 copies of a repayment proposal she had stayed up until midnight putting together, a realistic breakdown of what she could afford monthly based on her library income, with a projected timeline and a formal acknowledgement of responsibility. She had looked up the average cost of repainting a luxury vehicle panel. She had written a cover letter. She had paper-clipped everything neatly and slid it into a manila folder. Priya watched her iron her blouse from the doorway of their shared bathroom. You're going to a meeting with a stranger about a car scratch, Priya said. Not a job interview. I want to be taken seriously, Emma said. You want to not be sued. Same thing. She took the folder. She took her phone, fully charged. She texted Priya the cafe address, the time, and Vincent's name, and told her to call if she didn't hear back by 3 p.m. Then she walked the 12 blocks to Michigan Avenue in the thin November cold, folder tucked under her arm, telling herself this was straightforward. She owed a debt. She was going to acknowledge it like an adult and set up a plan. Straightforward. Riverside Cafe was warm and smelled like espresso and cinnamon. It was the kind of place with exposed brick walls and soft background music and small round tables that made every conversation feel private without actually being private. Emma arrived 7 minutes early, found a table near the window with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside, and ordered a tea she didn't particularly want just to have something to do with her hands. Vincent arrived exactly at 1. She recognized him immediately from the photograph, though he looked slightly different in person, less posed, more aware of the room. He moved through the cafe the way people do when they're used to being watched, without acknowledging it. Dark coat, no tie, the same unreadable expression. He spotted her before she could raise her hand, crossed directly to her table, and sat down without the kind of preliminary small talk most people use to fill the first 30 seconds. "Emma Calloway," he said. "Mr. Reed," she said, and slid the folder across the table before he could say anything else. "I put together a repayment proposal. I know the damage is significant, and I'm not pretending otherwise. The timeline is longer than I'd like, but every figure in there is realistic based on my actual income, and I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." Vincent looked at the folder. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at her instead, the same way he had studied the security footage, carefully, without rushing. Then he opened the folder. He read the first page, then the second. Emma watched his expression, trying to find anything in it: annoyance, amusement, impatience, and found nothing useful. He had one of those faces that seemed specifically designed to give nothing away. "You itemized the paint correction estimate," he said. "I looked it up. 3 sources. You cited them. It felt appropriate." A pause. Something shifted very slightly in his expression, not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood of one. He closed the folder. "The scratch isn't why I wanted to meet you," he said. Emma set down her tea. "I had a feeling. Something was taken from my car the same night. Something valuable. The security footage from the garage shows you at the vehicle. My team flagged you as a person of interest before they had any other information." Emma processed this slowly. "You thought I stole something." "My team thought you stole something," he said, with a precision that suggested the distinction mattered to him. "I read your note before I watched the footage. Someone who steals something doesn't leave a paper trail with their real name and phone number. So why the meeting? Because you're still connected to this whether you want to be or not. Your name is in circulation now among people who don't know what I know. They don't have the note. They have the footage. And to them, you're still a suspect." The warmth of the cafe suddenly felt a little less warm. "Other people are looking for me," Emma said. It wasn't a question. It landed as the explanation for 9 days of unknown calls and strangers on benches who looked away a second too late. "Yes." Emma looked at her folder, still sitting on the table between them, with its neat cover letter and its cited sources and its carefully calculated monthly installments. It seemed almost funny now, how prepared she had been for completely the wrong conversation. She opened her mouth to respond. That was when she saw them. 2 men, standing on the pavement outside the cafe window. They weren't looking at the menu board or checking their phones. They were looking through the glass, scanning the interior with the particular focused patience of people searching for a specific face. One of them found hers. Emma turned back to Vincent. "Those men outside," she said quietly. "They're not yours." Vincent didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. "No," he said, already rising slowly from his chair. "They're not." He left 2 bills on the table without counting them, picked up the folder, her folder, the one she had stayed up until midnight preparing, and held it at his side. "There's a rear exit through the kitchen," he said, his voice completely level. "Walk normally. Don't look back at the window." Emma stood. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, but her legs worked fine. She picked up her bag. "Mr. Reed," she said as they moved toward the back of the cafe. "Vincent." "Vincent," she kept her voice low. "I think I need you to explain what is actually going on." "I will," he said, "once we're outside." They slipped through the kitchen door and into the cold alley behind the building, and the comfortable story Emma had been telling herself, that this was simply about a scratch and a repayment plan, disappeared entirely, leaving behind something much less simple and considerably more frightening. And underneath the fear, just barely, the first quiet flicker of something that felt almost like curiosity. The alley behind Riverside Cafe connected to a side street that fed into the quieter end of Michigan Avenue. Vincent moved quickly but without the kind of urgency that draws attention, and Emma matched his pace, her folder tucked back under her arm, her mind running through everything he had told her in the 60 seconds since they had left the table. Something valuable had been taken from the car. Her name was circulating among people who believed she had taken it. The men outside the cafe were not Vincent's, which meant they belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had access to the same garage footage and had drawn the same wrong conclusion. She was a suspect in something she had never been part of. By the time they reached the side street, Vincent had already made 2 calls, brief, quiet, the kind where the other person clearly knew not to ask questions. A dark car appeared at the corner within 4 minutes. Emma got in without being asked. At that point, standing on a cold Chicago street with strangers possibly still looking for her face, the car seemed like the most reasonable option available. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere we can talk without an audience," Vincent said. They ended up in a private room above a restaurant 2 miles north. No windows facing the street. A table, 4 chairs, a carafe of water nobody touched. Vincent's associate, a steady-faced man named Marco who spoke very little but missed nothing, sat near the door. Vincent laid out the situation plainly. The drive, the failed exchange, the footage, the note. He told her enough to explain why she was involved without telling her more than she needed. Emma listened without interrupting, which he seemed to appreciate. When he finished, she asked one question. "Has anyone looked at the footage carefully? Not just my part. The whole garage, that entire evening." Marco glanced at Vincent. "We reviewed the relevant window," Marco said. "How long is the full recording?" 11 hours. "And you pulled the section with me in it." "And the exchange," Marco said. "Yes." Emma set her folder on the table and folded her hands on top of it. "I want to see the full footage," she said. From the beginning of that day. It took Marco 2 phone calls and 40 minutes to arrange access through the campus security office. Vincent apparently had reach into places Emma preferred not to think about too carefully. By mid-afternoon, they were seated in a small viewing room at Chicago University's campus security department, which smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, with the full 11 hours playing on a monitor. Emma had suggested the university library's archive terminal first, but the security office had better resolution. Marco fast-forwarded through the early hours. Mostly empty. Students arriving and leaving throughout the day. Emma's own arrival appeared at 4:47 p.m. She watched herself pull into the space, watched the scrape happen, watched herself get out and stand very still for a moment before reaching for her notepad. It was strange, watching yourself make a decision in real time. She remembered exactly what she had been thinking. She had been calculating whether she could afford to pretend it hadn't happened. She was glad she hadn't. Marco moved the footage forward past her departure. 5:03 p.m. The hypercar sat alone in its space. Students passed. A maintenance worker crossed the far end of the garage without coming close. Then, at 5:09 p.m., Emma leaned forward. "Stop," she said. Marco paused the footage. A figure had entered the garage from the pedestrian stairwell on the far left. Not the main entrance ramp where the primary camera was positioned, but a secondary access point that the initial review had apparently not prioritized. The figure was wearing a delivery uniform, brown jacket, a logo on the back that was partially obscured, a flat-brimmed cap pulled low. He was carrying a medium-sized box and moving with the particular purposeful energy of someone who belonged there and wanted everyone nearby to believe it. He passed the hypercar, slowed almost imperceptibly, kept walking, but his right hand had dropped briefly to hip level as he passed the rear wheel arch less than 2 seconds. The kind of movement you would miss entirely if you were focused on the main entrance, if you were watching the woman in the university hoodie who had left her name and number on a note. "He took something from under the car," Emma said. "Or placed something. I can't tell which direction, but his hand moved." Marco rewound it. Played it again. Vincent stood slightly behind Emma, watching over her shoulder. The delivery worker's hand. Down, then back up. 2 seconds. "We missed him," Marco said quietly. "You were looking at me," Emma said, without accusation. Just the fact of it. They spent the next hour tracing what they could from the footage. The delivery worker had entered from the pedestrian stairwell and exited through the same route, which connected to a service corridor on the ground floor. Emma pulled up the university's campus map on her phone and cross-referenced the service corridor exit point with the surrounding street layout. "He would have come out on Weller Street," she said, turning the phone so Vincent could see. There's a bus stop directly outside that exit, and a sandwich shop with an external camera above its entrance that faces the bus stop. Marco looked at Vincent. She's right, Marco said. I know, Vincent said. The sandwich shop footage was accessible through a request Marco made with the kind of quiet authority that Emma decided not to examine too closely. The external camera had captured the delivery worker emerging from the service corridor at 5:14 p.m., box still under his arm, and boarding a westbound bus. Route 72. Emma wrote down the bus number, the time, and the stop location in the notepad she kept in her bag out of habit, the same notepad she had used to write the apology. She didn't think about that symmetry until later. Route 72 runs toward the warehouse district, she said. If you can pull transit camera records for that bus between 5:15 and 6 p.m., I can pull them, Marco said. Then you'll have his route. And if you cross that against the delivery company logo on his jacket. Emma paused, rewinding the campus footage one more time on the monitor. She leaned close. The logo on the back of the jacket was partially obscured by the box he was carrying, but the bottom edge was visible. A partial arc blue lettering. That's not a real delivery company, she said. That arc is part of a custom logo. The font spacing is off for any major carrier. Someone made that jacket. The room was quiet. Vincent was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not suspicion. Not the careful neutrality he seemed to default to. Something more like recalibration. The look of someone updating a calculation they had thought was already settled. You study communications, he said. I notice things, Emma said simply. She capped her pen and put her notepad away. It's not a skill. It's just a habit. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that she had been invisible her whole life. Quiet in classrooms, overlooked in crowds. The person nobody quite remembered was in the room. And somewhere along the way, being overlooked had taught her to watch everything very carefully. The delivery worker had been invisible too. The difference was, he had chosen it deliberately. The transit camera records came through at 9 p.m. Emma was sitting at the far end of the table in the same room above the restaurant, her notepad open, her third cup of tea going cold beside her laptop. Marco had left twice to make calls. Vincent had barely moved from his chair across the table, reading through documents on his phone with the same unhurried focus he brought to everything. They had ordered food at some point. Emma had eaten half a sandwich without tasting it, and the quiet between them had settled into something less uncomfortable than it had been that morning. She was still slightly amazed that she was here at all. 24 hours ago, she had been ironing a blouse for a meeting she thought was about a repayment plan. Now she was sitting in a private room with a man whose full situation she still only partially understood, tracing the movements of a fake delivery worker through Chicago's transit system. And somehow it felt less frightening than it probably should have. Maybe because she was busy. Busy was easier than scared. Marco set his phone on the table and turned it to face them. He rode Route 72 to the Kedzie transfer point, he said. Switched to a southbound line. Rode at 11 stops. Got off near the warehouse district on South Halsted. Emma opened the city map she had pulled up earlier. South Halsted, and what cross street? 31st. She circled the intersection with her pen. There are 4 commercial storage units within 2 blocks of that stop, plus a logistics depot and a private freight company. She looked up. Do we know if the logo on his jacket matches anything registered in that area? Working on it, Marco said. What about the fake identity? Vincent asked. Marco pulled up another screen. The delivery company name on the jacket. We enhanced the partial logo and ran it. It's not registered anywhere in Illinois. The jacket itself is a custom print job, the kind you can order online in small batches. Untraceable without the original order details, he paused. But the name he used to access the campus service corridor, he signed in at a maintenance log near the ground floor entrance. Printed block letters. Daniel Reeves. Emma wrote it down. That name is registered to a real person, Marco continued. 58 years old, retired, lives in Naperville. No connection to anything. Someone borrowed the identity for a day, which means they had just enough information to pass a basic check, Emma said, but didn't expect anyone to look deeper. She tapped her pen against the notepad. He was confident. He thought this would be over quickly, grab the device, disappear, and let everyone spend their energy focused on me. The room was quiet for a moment. Someone pointed him at you, Vincent said. It wasn't a question. Someone knew I'd be in that garage, Emma said. Or they got lucky that I was. Either way, once I left that note, I became the perfect distraction. She said it without self-pity, just the flat logic of it. My name, my number, my face on camera. While everyone was looking at the shy girl who felt bad about a scratch, he was halfway across the city. They followed the trail the next morning. Marco had identified 2 locations along the delivery workers' route that showed up on business registration records: a freight forwarding office on West 29th and a private storage unit registered under a shell company on South Halstead, exactly where the transit footage had placed him. Vincent sent 2 of his people to the freight office. He and Marco went to the storage unit. Emma, after a brief and somewhat one-sided conversation in which she pointed out that she had found the lead in the first place, came with them. The storage unit was a standard commercial facility. Rows of corrugated metal doors, keypad entry, no attendant on site after 6 p.m. The unit registered to the shell company was number 14, ground level, near the back. It was empty. Not recently emptied. Properly cleared out. Nothing left behind. The kind of clean that suggested planning rather than panic. But the keypad entry log showed access 3 days ago, which placed it the day after the garage incident, and the unit dimensions matched the delivery worker's box almost exactly. He dropped the box here, Emma said, standing in the empty unit. Picked up something else, or left the device somewhere inside. Then cleared out when he was done. Or when he knew people were looking, Marco said. Emma crouched near the floor. The concrete was clean but not uniformly clean. There was a faint rectangular impression near the back wall, the kind left by a heavy flat-bottom container sitting in the same spot for an extended period. Whatever was stored here regularly, she said. It's been here a while. That impression is old. She stood up. This unit wasn't rented for this job. It was already in use. Which means whoever set this up had a connection to this facility before the garage incident. She looked at Vincent. This isn't someone who improvised. They had infrastructure in place. Vincent studied the impression on the floor. Someone inside my organization, he said quietly. Not to her exactly. More to himself. The way people speak when a thought they've been resisting finally forces its way through. Emma didn't respond to that. It wasn't her territory. But she kept the detail carefully in the back of her mind. The second location, the freight forwarding office on West 29th, gave them more. One of Vincent's people had photographed the visitor log before the office opened for the day. The same borrowed name, Daniel Reeves, appeared twice in the past 2 weeks. Visit 1 was 6 days before the garage incident. Visit 2 was the day after. Planning, then follow through. But the more useful detail was on the same log, 3 lines above the second visit. A different name, signing in to see the same freight contact. Marcus Ellison, an actual registered name, traceable, connected to a logistics consulting firm based in Chicago. Emma searched the name on her phone while Marco called it in. The logistics consulting firm was small, 4 employees listed, office on the north side, no obvious red flags in any public record. But when Emma cross-referenced the firm's listed director against the business registration database she had bookmarked, something caught her eye. The firm's director changed 8 months ago, she said. Previous director resigned. New one stepped in. She turned her phone around. The new director's name is listed as a holding company, which is registered to another holding company. She paused. In Milwaukee. Marco stopped his call. Vincent looked at the phone screen. Someone deliberately buried the ownership trail, Emma said. 2 holding companies deep, registered in a different state. That's not standard practice for a 4-person logistics firm. She met Vincent's eyes. Whoever set this up isn't just connected to your organization. They understand how to make paper disappear. The delivery worker had been a contractor. A single piece moved across a board by someone else's hand. And that someone had been planning this for at least 8 months. Emma wrote Milwaukee at the top of a fresh page in her notepad and underlined it twice. She didn't know yet that the name she was looking for was already inside the file she was building, hiding in plain sight, the way the most careful people always did. But she was getting close. The Milwaukee connection took another full day to untangle. Emma spent most of Thursday at the table that had effectively become her temporary workspace, cross-referencing business registrations, logistics filings, and property records across 2 states, while Marco fed her information in steady intervals, and Vincent moved in and out of the room handling things she wasn't privy to. She had stopped asking about those things. There was a clear boundary to what she was part of, and she had decided early on that respecting it was both practical and wise. What she was part of was the paper trail, and the paper trail was her territory entirely. By Thursday evening, she had mapped the ownership chain backward from the Milwaukee holding company through 4 layers of registration to a financial management firm on Chicago's North Side. The firm handled accounts for several mid-sized businesses, property management, logistics, one small import operation. Completely unremarkable on the surface, except that one of those accounts belonged to Vincent Reed's organization. Emma sat with that for a moment before she said anything. She turned it over carefully, checking her work, making sure the connection was real and not an artifact of reading too many corporate filings in a single sitting. It was real. She pushed her notepad across the table to Marco. He read it. His expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes shifted. He took the notepad and left the room without a word. The financial management firm's lead accountant was a man named Ryan Brooks. Emma learned this from Marco when he returned 20 minutes later. She also learned, from the tight set of his jaw, that Ryan Brooks was someone Vincent's organization knew. Not an outsider. Not a stranger discovered at the end of a paper trail. Someone familiar. Someone trusted. Vincent came back into the room shortly after. He read Emma's notes in full this time, following every step of the chain she had mapped. When he finished, he set the notepad down and stood very still for a moment in a way that reminded Emma of how she had stood in the parking garage, completely motionless while absorbing something she hadn't expected. Ryan has handled our accounts for 4 years, he said. That doesn't mean he took the drive, Emma said carefully. The connection I found puts him adjacent to the ownership chain. It doesn't put him in the garage. No, Vincent agreed. But it puts him in the conversation. He looked at Marco. Something passed between them that Emma couldn't fully read, but the outcome was clear. They were going to find Ryan Brooks, and they were going to do it that evening. Emma expected to be left behind at that point. Instead, Vincent looked at her and said, simply, "You found it." You should hear what he says. Ryan Brooks lived in a clean, modern apartment building in Lincoln Park. He was home when they arrived. Marco had confirmed that through means Emma didn't ask about, and he opened the door looking like a man who had been waiting for something unpleasant and had finally accepted that it was here. He was younger than Emma had imagined. Mid-30s, lean, wire-framed glasses, the careful grooming of someone who used routine as an anchor. He looked at Vincent with an expression that wasn't guilt exactly, but wasn't innocence either. It was the look of someone carrying a secret that had become too heavy to hold comfortably. "I've been trying to decide whether to call you," Ryan said. "That window has passed," Vincent said. "Tell me about the drive." They sat in Ryan's living room. Emma took the chair near the window and opened her notepad out of habit. Ryan noticed, but didn't comment. He told them everything. 6 days before the exchange, Ryan had received information, through a channel he described only as indirect, a message passed through a mutual contact, that the drive was going to be intercepted during the handoff. He didn't know who was behind it. He didn't know how they had learned about the exchange. But the information had been specific enough to take seriously, and he had made a decision without telling anyone. He had moved the drive, not stolen it, relocated it, taken it from the magnetic case beneath the wheel arch of the hypercar 2 days before the scheduled exchange, and placed it somewhere he considered safer, a lockbox inside the financial firm's Lincoln Park office, accessible only to him. His reasoning, as he explained it, was that if the interception attempt was real, the drive would be safe. If it turned out to be false information, he could return it before the exchange, and no one would ever know. "You moved it without telling me," Vincent said. "I was trying to protect it," Ryan said. "I didn't want to bring you incomplete information and cause unnecessary disruption to the exchange timeline." "So the drive was never in the car the night of the exchange," Emma said. Ryan looked at her, clearly registering her presence as something unexpected in this conversation. "No," he said. "It was already in the lockbox." Emma wrote this down. "Which means whoever sent you that warning already knew where the drive was supposed to be stored. And they fed you the relocation idea, directly or indirectly, to make sure the car was empty by the time the exchange happened." Ryan stared at her. "I don't. Think about it," Emma said, not unkindly. "You received a warning. You acted on it in exactly the way someone needed you to act. The drive was moved. The car was empty. The exchange fell apart. And you were the only person outside of the original arrangement who knew the drive had been relocated. She paused. Whoever sent you that warning didn't just predict the theft. They engineered your response to clear the path for it. The room was very quiet. Ryan took his glasses off and set them on the coffee table. He suddenly looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I thought I was being careful, he said. You were, Emma said. Someone just knew exactly how careful you'd be. Vincent had been standing near the window through most of this exchange, listening. He turned now and looked at Emma with the expression she had come to recognize, the recalibration look, the one that appeared when she said something that moved a piece further than he had placed it. The circle of people who knew about the exchange, he said slowly, and the specific storage location under the car, that information was held by fewer than 8 people, one of whom sent Ryan a warning, Emma said. Which means whoever this is, they're not outside your organization looking in. She closed her notepad. They were in the room when the exchange was planned. The weight of that landed on all 3 of them differently. For Ryan, it was relief at having finally told the truth and dread at what it meant. For Marco, it was the cold, focused anger of someone who had spent years protecting something that had been breached from the inside. For Vincent, it was something Emma couldn't fully name, a controlled, contained fury that never broke the surface but was present in every line of his posture. For Emma, it was the next thread to pull, because the inner circle was small, 8 people at most. And somewhere in that small group, hiding behind careful planning and borrowed identities and 2 holding companies in Milwaukee, was someone who had spent months building a deception so precise that it had nearly worked perfectly. Nearly. The list of 8 names sat in the center of the table, like something none of them particularly wanted to touch. Vincent had written them himself, in a plain notebook, in handwriting that was smaller and neater than Emma would have guessed. 8 people who had been present when the exchange was planned, who had known both the timing and the precise storage location beneath the car. 8 people, one of whom had spent months quietly building a trap that nearly swallowed everyone in the room. Marco stood near the window, arms crossed, running through the names in his head the way Emma could tell he had been doing since the previous evening. Ryan Brooks had been returned to his apartment with instructions that amounted to staying very close to home and very far from his phone. The drive, still safely in the Lincoln Park lockbox, had been retrieved. That at least was resolved. Everything else was still moving. Emma studied the list. She had been given access to it, which still faintly surprised her. She was a communications student with a notepad and a habit of noticing things, sitting at a table with people for whom caution was a professional baseline. But she had earned her place in the room one observation at a time, and nobody was pretending otherwise anymore. She read the 8 names slowly. Can I see the travel logs? She asked. The ones connected to the Milwaukee holding company. Marco pulled them up on his laptop and turned it toward her. She worked through them methodically. The Milwaukee holding company had been registered 11 months ago. In the 3 months following its registration, there were 5 visits logged to the Associated Freight office, the same one on West 29th where Daniel Reeves had signed in. Business travel records connected to the logistics consulting firm showed movement between Chicago and Milwaukee on 6 separate occasions over the same period. Emma cross-referenced the travel dates against the 8 names on the list. Most had alibi-level distance from the Milwaukee dates, verifiable locations, documented meetings, nothing that placed them near that corridor during that window. 3 names remained after the first pass. She set those 3 aside and went back to the freight office visitor logs, this time looking not just for Daniel Reeves, but for any name appearing more than once across the full visit history. One name appeared 3 times. Not Daniel Reeves. Not a borrowed identity. An actual name, signed in full each time, so consistent it looked almost deliberately casual, the kind of signature that says I have every right to be here and I'm not hiding anything. The name was Daniel Hayes. Emma looked up from the laptop. Daniel Hayes, she said. Is he on the list? Vincent and Marco exchanged a look. He was, Vincent said. He's not currently active. He left the organization 14 months ago. Emma felt something click into place. 14 months ago, she repeated. The Milwaukee holding company was registered 11 months ago. 3 months after he left, she turned the laptop back toward them. He signed into the freight office 3 times. His name is in the visitor log, in his own handwriting, every time. He wasn't hiding his visits, He was confident enough that he didn't think they'd be connected back to him because he was already gone from the operation. Daniel Hayes was our logistics coordinator, Marcos said. The words came out with a particular flatness that suggested he was managing a strong reaction. He left voluntarily. Clean departure. No indication of grievance. What did he take when he left? Emma asked. Marco looked at Vincent. Access records, Vincent said after a moment. Contacts. Internal procedures, a pause. He would have had detailed knowledge of how exchanges were structured. Storage methods. The inner circle for major operations. So he left with everything he needed, Emma said. And then he spent 3 months setting up the infrastructure, the shell companies, the freight connection, the fake delivery identity. Before he was ready to move, she leaned back in her chair. He didn't want the drive itself. That's the thing that didn't make sense to me until now. If he wanted the drive, he would have taken it cleanly. Instead, he moved it through Ryan, indirectly, using Ryan's own caution against him, and made sure the exchange fell apart publicly. Why? Marco said. Because a failed exchange between two parties doesn't just hurt one side. It creates suspicion between them. Each group thinks the other interfered. Trust breaks down. Relationships fracture. Emma traced the logic carefully as she spoke it. While both sides are focused on each other and on me, Daniel Hayes walks away with whatever he actually wanted. And from what I can see in these filings, what he actually wanted was the assets connected to that logistics firm. She turned to a page in her notepad where she had mapped the ownership chain the previous evening. At the bottom of the chain, beneath the Milwaukee holding company and the Chicago financial firm, was a property asset, a commercial warehouse on Chicago's south side, listed under the second holding company, valued in the filings at considerably more than its unremarkable exterior would suggest. He maneuvered everyone into looking at the drive, Emma said, while the actual prize was the warehouse. And with the organization destabilized by a failed exchange, a missing device, and internal suspicion, nobody was watching the property filings. The room was quiet long enough that Emma could hear the city outside. He's going to liquidate it, Vincent said. He's probably already started, Emma said. The second visit to the freight office was 4 days ago. He's moving quickly now because he knows the window is closing. She paused. But he doesn't know we found the trail. As far as he's aware, everyone is still looking at Ryan, or at me, or at each other. He thinks he has more time than he does. Marco was already on his phone. The warehouse, Vincent said to Emma. You think that's his final destination? I think that's where the documentation is, she said. The physical records that tie everything together. The asset transfer, the shell company filings, the logistics connections. If he's liquidating cleanly, he needs those records either destroyed or in his possession before he disappears. She looked at her notepad. Milwaukee was the setup. Chicago is where he finishes it. Vincent studied her for a moment. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not the recalibration look, not the careful neutrality. Something closer to respect, the uncomplicated kind. The sort that doesn't need to be dressed up as anything else. You got all of that from travel logs and business filings, he said. And a visitor register, Emma said. He signed his real name 3 times. Careful people usually make one careless choice. His was confidence. Marco came back to the table. Warehouse is registered to the second holding company. Transfer filing was submitted 2 days ago, not yet processed. If we move tonight, the documentation is still on site. Vincent stood. The decision was already made. Emma could see it in the way he moved, purposeful and settled. We go tonight, he said. Emma closed her notepad and picked up her bag. Nobody told her to stay behind this time. The warehouse sat at the edge of Chicago's South Side industrial corridor like it had been forgotten there. A wide, low-slung building with a gravel approach, a chain-link perimeter, and the particular silence of a place that conducted its business quietly and preferred it that way. The surrounding blocks were a mix of freight yards and shuttered manufacturing units, the kind of neighborhood where a vehicle parked after dark didn't attract attention because nobody was looking. They arrived at 10:40 p.m. in 2 cars. Vincent, Marco, and Emma in the first. 3 of Vincent's people in the second, none of whom Emma had been introduced to by name and none of whom seemed to require it. They parked on the service road behind the adjacent freight yard and approached on foot, keeping to the shadow of the perimeter fence. Emma had spent the drive over studying the warehouse's property filing, which included a basic floor plan submitted during a zoning application 3 years prior. She had photographed it on her phone. It showed a main floor divided into 2 sections, a front receiving area and a larger rear storage space, with a mezzanine office running along the back wall, accessible by an interior staircase. If he's keeping documents on site, the mezzanine office is the most likely location, she said quietly, showing Marco the floor plan on her phone. It's elevated, separate from the main floor, and it's the only enclosed space in the building with walls. Marco studied it for a moment, then passed the phone to Vincent. Side entrance on the east wall, Vincent said, looking at the plan. Closer to the staircase. What nobody had fully anticipated was that Daniel Hayes would not be alone. There were 2 vehicles parked inside the chain-link perimeter, a black transit van and a silver sedan that Emma recognized with a jolt of cold clarity. She had seen that sedan before, or one exactly like it, outside Riverside Cafe, 4 days ago, idling at the curb while 2 men looked through the glass. Curtis Wade, Marco said under his breath, confirming what Emma had half concluded already. The rival group had found their way here through their own trail. Different starting point, different path, same destination. Which meant the warehouse currently contained Daniel Hayes, Curtis Wade's people, and whatever documentation tied everything together. And 2 groups with conflicting interests were now converging on the same building at the same time. Vincent processed this in about 4 seconds. We don't engage Wade's people directly, he said. We get to the office, we get the documents, and we leave before this becomes something else. Emma looked at the building. Through a gap in the corrugated wall panels near the east entrance, she could see interior light, not overhead fluorescence, but the narrower beam of portable work lighting, the kind you bring when you're not planning to stay long. He's already in the mezzanine, she said. He's pulling the records right now. Then we move, Vincent said. The east entrance was unlocked, not forced, which meant Daniel had a key, which meant his connection to this property was deeper than a shell company registration. Emma filed that away automatically and followed Marco through the door into the building's side corridor. The main floor was largely empty. Rows of metal shelving, mostly bare, a few stacked pallets near the receiving area. The portable lighting was coming from above, through the mezzanine's open front face, throwing a pale rectangle of light down onto the concrete below. From somewhere on the far side of the main floor, Emma could hear voices. Low, controlled, the particular tone of people trying to manage a situation that was developing faster than expected. Curtis Wade's people had come in through the front. She could see the receiving bay door standing open, and they were moving toward the mezzanine staircase from the opposite direction. They were going to reach the staircase first. Emma touched Vincent's arm and pointed. He saw it immediately. What happened next was not what Emma had expected, which was some version of a direct confrontation. 2 groups meeting at the base of a staircase with bad intentions. Instead, Vincent made a decision that surprised her. He stepped out onto the main floor, clearly visible, and spoke at a normal volume. Wade's people are going to find exactly what I find, he said, loud enough to carry. The question is whether anyone leaves here with something useful, or whether we spend the next 2 hours achieving nothing while Hayes finishes what he came here to do. The movement on the far side of the floor stopped. A pause. Then a voice from the shadows near the receiving bay. Read. The documentation in that office connects to both our operations, Vincent said. Hayes played us against each other deliberately. That's documented too, if we get there before he destroys it. Another pause. Longer this time. Office first, the voice said finally. Everything else after. It was not trust. It was arithmetic. 2 groups recognizing that competing for the same staircase served only the man currently at the top of it. They reached the mezzanine in time. Daniel Hayes was standing at a metal filing cabinet when they came through the office door, a leather satchel open on the desk beside him, several folders already inside. He was in his mid-40s, compact and efficient-looking, with the careful stillness of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was now recalculating because it had arrived differently than expected. He looked at the people in the doorway. His eyes moved to Emma last, and stayed there a moment longer than on anyone else. Trying to place her, Emma could tell, running through his mental map of the operation and finding no slot where she belonged. That small confusion, she thought, was probably the most satisfying thing she had experienced all week. The transfer filing hasn't processed yet, Emma said, stepping forward. She set her phone on the desk, the property record open on the screen. Which means the asset is still legally connected to the holding company, which is still connected to you. Through the registration trail I documented 2 days ago, she opened her notepad to the page where she had mapped the full chain and laid it flat on the desk beside her phone. Everything you moved is still traceable. Everything you planned is already written down by someone else. Daniel looked at the notepad, then at Vincent, then back at Emma. You're a student, he said. Communications, Emma said. I noticed things. Marco moved to the filing cabinet. The folders Daniel had already packed into the satchel were removed and opened, methodically, on the desk. Each one confirmed what Emma's trail had already outlined. Asset transfer instructions, shell company correspondence, the logistics firm's internal records, a handwritten schedule of the planned exchange disruption with dates that matched perfectly against every piece of evidence Emma had assembled across the past 4 days. His own paper trail, complete and damning, laid out on the desk he had intended to empty. On the other side of the mezzanine, one of Curtis Wade's people was photographing documents with the same quiet efficiency. Nobody interfered. The arithmetic still held. Daniel sat down heavily in the office chair. The satchel remained open but useless on the desk beside him. I had 8 months, he said. Not to anyone in particular. More the way people speak when they're accounting for where something went wrong. You signed your real name 3 times, Emma said quietly. He looked at her. In the freight office visitor log, she said. You were confident. Confident people make that choice. He didn't respond. There was nothing particularly useful left to say. Outside, Chicago moved through its night without any knowledge of the mezzanine office, the open filing cabinet, or the neat handwritten notepad sitting on the desk that had unraveled 8 months of careful work in 4 days. Emma picked up her notepad, capped her pen, and slid it back into her bag. 3 weeks passed. Chicago moved into the deep end of November, the kind of cold that arrives without negotiation and settles in for months. The trees along Michigan Avenue lost their last leaves. The university campus filled with the particular energy of students chasing deadlines before the semester break, heads down, coffee cups in hand, moving fast between buildings. Emma moved with them, same as always. Same hoodie, same heavy bag, same 12-block walk from her apartment to campus every morning. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, everything felt slightly different. Not dramatically, not in the way that made a good story at parties. Just a quiet internal shift, the kind that happens when you go through something that tests a version of yourself you didn't know existed and find out it holds up. She had said very little to anyone about what had happened. Priya knew there had been some kind of resolution. Emma had come home at 2 a.m. 3 weeks ago, sat on the kitchen counter eating cereal, and said simply that the car situation was sorted. Priya had looked at her for a long moment, clearly sensing that the car situation had involved considerably more than a repayment plan and had been wise enough not to push. Emma's name had been quietly removed from whatever informal suspect lists it had appeared on. Marco had confirmed this in a brief message 4 days after the warehouse. No details, no explanation, just 7 words. Your name is clean. No further concerns. She had read it 3 times, then deleted it, then made coffee. The apology note became a small, strange story. Not publicly, nothing that made the news, nothing that spread beyond a specific and very private circle. But within that circle, Emma had heard through Marco, the note had taken on a minor legendary quality. The idea that the entire chain of events had begun because a student with $11 in her wallet had stopped to do the right thing, had written her name and number on a piece of notepaper and tucked it under a windshield wiper, struck people as either deeply funny or quietly remarkable, depending on their temperament. Emma thought it was mostly just what happened when you were raised by parents who insisted on accountability, even when it was inconvenient. She had called her mother the week after the warehouse. Hadn't told her anything specific, just called to hear her voice, to talk about ordinary things, her father's bad knee and the bookkeeping software her mother was learning, and whether Emma was eating enough vegetables. The call had lasted 40 minutes, and Emma had felt, by the end of it, something close to completely normal again. That helped more than she would have expected. Vincent's private thanks arrived on a Tuesday. Not a message this time. An envelope, delivered to the university library where she worked her afternoon shift, addressed in handwriting she now recognized. Inside was a single folded card. You found what 8 people and 4 days of professional investigation missed. That's not nothing. V. Or below the note, a separate folded paper. She opened it. It was her repayment proposal, the one she had prepared the night before their first meeting, with the itemized paint correction estimate and the cited sources and the carefully calculated monthly installments. He had kept it. At the bottom, in the same small, neat handwriting, 2 words. Debt cleared. Emma stood behind the library circulation desk, holding the card for a long moment. Around her, students moved through the stacks, returning books, finding tables, doing the ordinary business of learning. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone's phone buzzed twice on a nearby table. She folded the card carefully, put it in the inside pocket of her bag, and went back to work. The conversation with Professor Adler happened the following Thursday. Diana Adler taught investigative journalism and media ethics, a course Emma had always considered slightly beyond her lane. She was a communications major with a focus on content strategy, not journalism. She had taken one of Adler's seminars in her second year and done well, but they had never had a particular relationship beyond that. So when Professor Adler stopped her after a guest lecture and asked if she had a few minutes, Emma assumed it was about an assignment. It wasn't. "I've been hearing interesting things," Adler said, settling into the chair behind her desk with the directness that was her defining quality as both a teacher and a person. "Secondhand, through channels I won't specify. About a student who spent several days following a documentary trail across Chicago and apparently out-investigated a professional operation." Emma opened her mouth. "You don't have to confirm anything," Adler said. "I'm not asking for details. I'm asking about you." She folded her hands on the desk. What did it feel like, working through something like that? Emma thought about it honestly. Like reading a book where someone kept hiding the page numbers, she said. Frustrating. But once you found a number, you could find the next one. And once you could see the sequence, the story was already there. It had always been there. Adler studied her. "That's exactly how investigative journalism works," she said. "Not instinct. Not drama. Sequence. Patience. The willingness to keep reading when most people have already closed the book." Emma said nothing. "I have a third-year investigative track opening in January," Adler said. "It's application only. 12 students. The work is real, cold case research, public record analysis, source documentation. It's not content strategy." A pause. "But I think you should apply." Emma looked at the window behind Adler's desk. Outside, the November campus was gray and cold and full of students who had somewhere to be. "I'll think about it," Emma said. "You'll apply," Adler said, with the confidence of someone who had been reading students for 20 years and knew the difference between uncertainty and deflection. Emma almost smiled. "I'll apply," she said. She took the long way home that afternoon. It added 6 blocks and passed directly by the Chicago University parking garage where everything had started. She wasn't sure, when she turned onto that street, whether she had done it consciously or whether her feet had simply known the way. The garage looked exactly as it always had. Concrete levels, flickering lights on the lower floor, a handful of cars in the late afternoon spaces. The entrance ramp where the security camera blinked its slow red pulse. Ordinary in every possible way. Emma stood at the bottom of the ramp for a moment, hands in her jacket pockets, looking up at the familiar gray structure. She thought about the note. $11. A granola bar. The sound of metal on metal and the 3 seconds when she could have simply driven away. She thought about Ryan Brooks sitting in his living room with his glasses off, exhausted by a secret he had carried alone. About Marco's controlled anger and the way it came from loyalty rather than pride. About Vincent reading her repayment proposal with its cited sources and the expression on his face, the first real crack in all that careful neutrality, when he realized she had itemized the paint correction estimate. She thought about Daniel Hayes looking at her across the mezzanine desk and saying "you're a student," as though that explained a limitation and the quiet satisfaction of proving that it didn't. She thought about a delivery worker moving through a parking garage with his hand dropping briefly to hip level, confident that nobody was watching carefully enough to notice. Everybody had been watching the wrong thing. Emma had simply watched everything. She smiled, small, private, the kind that doesn't need an audience, and turned away from the garage. The walk home felt lighter than it had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved, though it mostly was. Not because the fear was completely gone, though it had faded to something manageable. But because somewhere between a parking scratch and a mezzanine office in a Southside warehouse, she had learned something about herself that no classroom had been able to teach her. She noticed things that other people missed. And in the right circumstances, in the moments that actually mattered, that quiet, unremarkable habit turned out to be worth considerably more than anyone, including Emma herself, had ever imagined. She pulled her jacket tighter against the November cold and walked home through the city, already thinking about the application. The girl nobody noticed had turned out to be the only one who saw everything clearly. And,